On a sweltering Texas evening, a single father counted his last $47 while staring at an eviction notice that would shut down his struggling diner in 7 days. Then came a sound no summer heat could mask: the thunder of 13 motorcycles roaring into his empty parking lot. When their leather-clad captain stepped through the door and later caught a glimpse of the Navy SEAL trident tattooed across his forearm, time itself seemed to freeze. What happened next transformed a quiet battle for survival into an extraordinary storm of courage, sisterhood, and unexpected hope. If true stories of second chances, unwavering loyalty, and the kind of generosity that restores faith in humanity speak to your soul, stay with us. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join a community of believers who know that miracles can arrive on 2 wheels. Now, settle in as we share this remarkable journey of how 13 strangers became an unbreakable family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Texas heat pressed down on Dusty Ridge like a heavy iron, turning the late afternoon into a furnace that shimmered across empty highways. Inside the Crossroads Diner, Jasper Holt stood behind the counter with his sleeves rolled up, wiping down surfaces that were already spotless. The air conditioner wheezed in the corner, struggling against the relentless summer blaze. A single ceiling fan turned lazy circles overhead, doing little more than moving hot air from one side of the room to the other. Jasper reached beneath the cash register and pulled out a small metal box, the kind that once held his grandfather's fishing lures. Now it held something far less comforting. He opened it slowly, knowing what he would find but hoping somehow the contents had multiplied since yesterday. They hadn't. 2 20s, a 5, and a crumpled $2 bill lay flat against the worn metal. He counted once, then again, fingers moving with the careful precision of a man who had learned to check his gear twice before every mission. $47. That was all that stood between him and complete ruin. Next to the cash box sat the envelope that had arrived 3 days ago, its edges already softened from being opened and refolded too many times. Jasper unfolded the letter once more, even though every word was burned into his memory. Notice of lease termination. Amount due: $8,500. Final date: 7 days. The property owner had been patient, more patient than most would have been. But patience had limits, and Jasper had finally reached them. 7 days. 1 week until a man in a pressed suit would arrive with legal documents and a locksmith, and the Crossroads Diner, the one fragile thing Jasper had built after leaving the Navy, would be sealed shut like a tomb. He exhaled slowly through his nose, the sound harsh in the quiet space. 7 days, until he had nowhere to take his 7-year-old daughter, nowhere to cook the meals that kept a roof over their heads, nowhere to prove that he could make a life worth living after everything he had lost. From the back hallway came the soft sound of humming. Light and carefree, Lily appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled into 2 bouncing ponytails, wearing a sunflower yellow dress that seemed to capture every bit of light in the dim diner. She carried a coloring book under one arm and a shoebox filled with crayons under the other. Her smile was bright enough to cut through the heaviest shadows. "Daddy, can I color at the corner booth?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular music that only 7-year-olds possessed. Jasper felt the tightness in his chest loosen just slightly. He tucked the envelope quickly under the register, not wanting her to see it, not wanting her innocent world touched by adult worries. "Of course, sweetheart. Stay cool, all right? Drink some water if you get too warm." She nodded seriously, then skipped toward the booth nearest the window where the evening sun painted golden rectangles across the worn vinyl seats. Jasper watched her settle in, spreading her crayons out in a careful rainbow arc, completely absorbed in her own small universe. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply observe her, the way her tongue poked out slightly when she concentrated, the way she hummed the same 3 notes over and over. She looked so much like her mother, it hurt. Sarah had been gone for 2 years now, taken by an illness that moved faster than any enemy Jasper had ever faced in combat. The diner had been Sarah's dream, a place where travelers and locals could find a hot meal and a friendly face. Jasper had promised her, in those final difficult days, that he would keep it alive, that he would raise Lily in a place filled with warmth and community, not cold barracks or lonely apartments. But promises, he had learned, were easier to make than to keep. He returned to his work, moving through the familiar rhythms of closing prep, wiping down the grill, checking the walk-in cooler where 3 days' worth of food sat, maybe 4 if he stretched it, refilling the napkin dispensers, sweeping the already clean floor. Each task was a small stand against chaos, a way to maintain order when everything else felt like it was slipping through his fingers like sand. The diner had been struggling for months. The highway bypass that opened last fall had redirected most of the through traffic. The traffic that used to stop for burgers and coffee and pie. Now only the locals came, and even they were few and far between. Jasper had tried everything: breakfast specials, loyalty cards, extended hours. Nothing seemed to work. The bills piled up faster than the customers came in. He paused at the window, looking out at the empty parking lot. The neon sign that read, "Crossroads Diner, good food, good people," flickered weakly against the descending dusk. Beyond the lot, the Texas landscape stretched endless and flat, dotted with scrub brush and telephone poles. The highway ran like a black ribbon toward the horizon, shimmering with heat mirages that made the distance look like water. Jasper checked the clock mounted above the pie case. 6:43 in the evening. Too early to close, too late to expect any real customers. He considered making coffee, but decided against wasting the beans. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water from the tap and leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. It was a different kind of tired than he had known in the Navy. Back then, exhaustion came from physical exertion, from missions that pushed his body to its absolute limits. This was a weariness of the spirit, a fatigue born from fighting a battle he didn't know how to win. From the corner booth, Lily called out, "Daddy, look, I drew us." She held up her coloring book, and, even from across the room, Jasper could see 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, standing in front of a building with a big smile drawn above it. "That's beautiful, honey," he said, his voice catching slightly. She beamed and returned to her work, adding what looked like flowers around the border. Jasper swallowed hard. How was he supposed to tell her that in 7 days, they might not have this place anymore? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes trying your best still wasn't enough? The cash box sat open on the counter, the $47 looking impossibly small. The eviction notice lay hidden beneath the register like a coiled snake. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the voice that had kept him alive through years of dangerous missions whispered the same question over and over. What now? What now? What now? Jasper set down his water glass and was about to lock the front door when he heard it. At first, he thought it might be thunder rolling in from the distant hills, but the sky was clear, painted in shades of orange and purple by the setting sunday. The sound grew louder, a deep rhythmic rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. He stepped toward the window, his military training instantly alert, cataloging the sound, identifying it. Motorcycles. Not just 1 or 2, but many. The rumble built into a roar, and then, through the heat shimmer of the evening, he saw them, headlights cutting through the dusk, at least a dozen, maybe more. They moved in formation, a rolling wave of chrome and leather, heading straight toward the Crossroads Diner. Jasper's hand instinctively moved to his hip, where years ago he would have found a sidearm. Now there was nothing but empty space. He glanced back at Lily, who had looked up from her coloring, her eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. The motorcycles drew closer, their engines creating a symphony of power that drowned out every other sound. And in that moment, standing in his failing diner with $47 to his name and 7 days until eviction, Jasper Holt had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The sound of 13 motorcycles pulling into the Crossroads Diner parking lot was like standing at the edge of a runway, as fighter jets took off. The roar filled every corner of the small building, rattling the windows and making the silverware chime against the tables. Jasper moved quickly to the door, his body shifting into a mode of cautious readiness that years of training had made instinctive. Through the glass, he watched as the bikes arranged themselves in 2 neat rows, their chrome exhaust pipes gleaming in the fading sunlight. The riders dismounted with practiced synchronicity, each movement efficient and purposeful. They were all women. Jasper realized with some surprise. Each wore black leather vests adorned with patches and insignias he couldn't quite make out from this distance. Their helmets came off one by one, revealing faces of various ages, some young with defiant expressions, others older with the calm confidence of experienced riders. But it was the woman at the front who commanded his attention. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She stood taller than most of the others, with long dark hair that she shook free from her helmet in one smooth motion. Even from inside the diner, Jasper could sense her authority, the way the other riders oriented themselves around her, like planets around a Sunday. She wore the same black leather vest, but hers bore additional patches on the shoulders, marks of rank or achievement. When she turned toward the diner, her eyes swept across the building with an assessing gaze that Jasper recognized. It was the look of someone used to evaluating situations quickly and making decisions that others would follow. She took 3 steps toward the door, and Jasper could see her more clearly now. Strong features, a scar that traced a thin line along her left jawbone, and eyes that were an unusual shade of amber, almost gold in the evening light. When she reached the door, she didn't immediately try to open it. Instead, she stood there for a moment, as if giving him time to decide whether to lock it or let her in. Behind her, the other 12 riders had gathered in a loose semicircle, waiting. Some shifted their weight from foot to foot, clearly exhausted. Others wiped sweat from their foreheads or stretched their backs after what must have been a long ride. But none of them moved toward the door. They waited for their leader to make the first contact. Jasper glanced back at Lily, who had climbed up on her knees in the booth to get a better view of the motorcycles. Her eyes were wide with wonder, not fear. That decided it for him. He reached for the door handle and pulled it open, letting in a wave of hot evening air and the lingering scent of engine oil and road dust. The woman at the door met his eyes directly. "We need help," she said, her voice clear and steady, with no trace of pleading or desperation despite her words. 13 riders. We've been on the road for 8 hours straight, and we're not going to make it to our destination tonight. We need water, food if you have it, and a place to rest for a few hours before we push on." Jasper's first instinct was practical assessment. 13 people. His limited supplies, the $47 that wouldn't stretch to feed even half that number. The eviction notice waiting under the register. But even as these thoughts raced through his mind, another part of him, the part that had been trained to evaluate situations from multiple angles, was processing other details. These women were organized, disciplined. The way they had parked their bikes, the way they waited without crowding the entrance, the way their leader approached with respect rather than demand, all of it spoke to a code of conduct. And there was something else, something in the woman's amber eyes that reminded him of the way his SEAL team leaders used to look before asking for one more mission, one more impossible task. It was the look of someone who didn't ask for help lightly. "How far have you come?" Jasper asked. "Left Oklahoma City at dawn," the woman replied. "Heading to a rally in El Paso, but we underestimated the heat and the distance. 2 of my riders are dealing with dehydration, and we're all running on empty." Jasper glanced past her at the assembled riders. Now that she mentioned it, he could see the signs, faces flushed red from more than just sun exposure, hands trembling slightly as they removed gloves, the way a couple of them leaned heavily against their bikes. These women had pushed themselves to their limits. He made his decision. "Come in," he said, stepping back from the door. "All of you, I'll get water started and see what food I can put together." The woman's expression shifted, surprise flickering across her features before settling into something that looked like relief mixed with respect. "Thank you," she said simply. Then she turned to her crew and raised her voice. "All right, ladies, we've got shelter. Boots clean, voices low, and remember your manners. This man's doing us a kindness." The riders moved forward, filing through the door in orderly fashion. Each one nodded or murmured thanks as they passed Jasper. He directed them toward the larger tables near the center of the diner, and they settled in with the same quiet discipline they had shown outside. Some immediately reached for the water pitchers he kept on each table, pouring glasses and drinking deeply. Others simply sat, letting their bodies relax after hours of fighting wind and heat. Lily had climbed down from her booth and now stood partially hidden behind Jasper's leg, peeking out at the newcomers with curious eyes. The leader noticed her immediately and crouched down to the young girl's level, a smile softening her stern features. "Hey there," she said gently. "What's your name?" Lily looked up at her father, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Lily," she said quietly. "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Faith," the woman replied. "We're sorry to come in so loud. I bet all those motorcycles made quite a noise." Lily nodded, then surprised both adults by asking, "Are you a motorcycle club, like in the movies?" Faith's smile widened into a grin. "Something like that. We're called the Desert Riders, and we travel all over helping people who need it. Right now, though, we're the ones who need help." "My daddy's really good at helping people," Lily said with the absolute confidence that only a 7-year-old could muster. "He makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the whole world." Faith looked up at Jasper, one eyebrow raised with amusement. And something else. Approval, perhaps. "Is that so? Well, we'd be honored to try them if your daddy's willing to make some." Jasper felt the weight of all those eyes on him. 13 tired women who had been riding through brutal heat, trusting their leader's judgment that this stranger in an empty diner would help them. He thought of the $47, the dwindling supplies, the 7 days until eviction. Then he thought of Sarah's voice from 2 years ago, making him promise to always be the kind of man who did the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "Grilled cheese it is," he said, "with tomato soup if you want it. Give me 20 minutes. A collective sigh of relief passed through the group, and several of the riders exchanged glances that spoke of gratitude beyond words. Faith stood back up, extending her hand to Jasper. "Faith Gilbert," she said, "Captain of the Desert Riders. We won't forget this." Jasper took her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of years working with tools and machinery. Jasper Holt, owner of the Crossroads, or at least for another week. Something flickered in Faith's eyes at that last comment, a question forming, but she didn't press. Instead, she simply nodded and turned to help her crew settle in. Jasper watched for a moment as the women organized themselves, some heading to the restroom to splash water on their faces, others pulling out phones to check in with people back home. They moved with the ease of long familiarity, a team that knew each other well. He turned toward the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves further. 13 grilled cheese sandwiches and 13 bowls of soup would take most of his remaining bread and the last 2 cans of tomatoes. By the time he served them, he'd be down to maybe $20 worth of supplies and still $47 in cash. The math didn't work, but somehow, in this moment, it didn't seem to matter. These women needed help, and he had been trained his entire adult life to answer that call, no matter the personal cost. As he fired up the grill and started laying out bread, he heard Lily's voice from the dining room, already chattering away to some of the riders, telling them about her coloring book and the picture she had drawn. The sound of her laughter mixed with the deeper voices of the women, and for the first time in months, the Crossroads diner felt alive again. Jasper allowed himself the smallest smile as he began cooking, unaware that the woman called Faith was watching him through the kitchen window with an intensity that suggested she was seeing far more than just a man making sandwiches. The kitchen filled with the familiar sounds and smells that had always brought Jasper a measure of peace. Butter sizzling on the hot griddle, bread turning golden brown, the rich aroma of tomato soup warming in a large pot. He worked with the efficiency of someone who had cooked thousands of meals, his hands moving automatically while his mind processed the unusual situation unfolding in his dining room. 13 strangers, all women, all bikers, all depending on him in this moment. The military part of his brain noted exits, assessed potential risks, cataloged details. But the father part, the part that Sarah had nurtured and encouraged, simply focused on the task at hand, feeding people who were hungry. Through the kitchen window, he could observe the big riders as they settled into the space. They had arranged themselves across 4 tables, naturally forming smaller groups but maintaining a clear line of sight to their leader. Faith Gilbert sat at the center table, her back to the wall, a position Jasper recognized immediately. It was where he would have sat, the tactically advantageous spot that allowed her to see the entire room, both exits, and the kitchen. She was drinking water slowly, rationing it the way someone who understood dehydration would. One of the younger riders, a woman with short blonde hair and a sleeve of colorful tattoos, had moved to Lily's booth. Jasper tensed slightly, his protective instincts flaring, but he watched as the woman simply admired Lily's drawings, pointing at different colors and asking questions. Lily, never one to meet a stranger, was explaining her artistic process with the seriousness of a gallery curator. The biker listened with genuine interest, nodding along, and Jasper felt his shoulders relax incrementally. Another rider, older with silver streaks in her black hair, had stood up and started refilling water pitchers without being asked, moving from table to table with the practiced ease of someone who had worked in restaurants before. She caught Jasper's eye through the window and gave him a small nod, as if to say, "We help where we can." He nodded back, appreciating the gesture. The first batch of grilled cheese sandwiches came off the griddle perfectly, golden and crispy with cheese melted to just the right consistency. Jasper plated them quickly, adding a handful of chips to each one from his dwindling supply, then pushed through the kitchen door with 4 plates balanced along his arms, a skill he had mastered in the early days of running the diner. "First round," he announced, setting the plates down at Faith's table. The 3 women seated with her looked at the food with expressions that went beyond simple hunger. It was gratitude, raw and unfiltered. "This looks amazing," one of them said, a rider with red hair tied back in a practical braid. "Thank you so much." Jasper just nodded and returned to the kitchen for the next batch. As he worked, he found himself falling into a rhythm, the kind that came from cooking for crowds in the Navy, when he had pulled mess duty and learned that feeding people well was its own form of service. The soup reached the perfect temperature, and he began ladling it into bowls, adding a sprinkle of dried basil from a jar that was probably older than it should be but still had flavor to give. By the time all 13 riders had food in front of them, the diner had transformed. What had been a space of empty silence now hummed with quiet conversation and the sounds of people eating. Jasper noticed that none of them dove into their food with the desperation he had expected. Instead, they waited until everyone was served, and then Faith raised her water glass slightly. "To unexpected kindness," she said simply. "To unexpected kindness," the others echoed, and then they ate. Jasper busied himself in the kitchen, giving them space and privacy. He wiped down surfaces that didn't need wiping, organized supplies that were already organized. Anything to keep his hands busy while his mind raced. The reality of what he had just done was settling in. He had used up most of his remaining inventory to feed 13 strangers. The generous part of him, the part Sarah had loved, said it was the right thing to do. The practical part, the part that had to figure out how to keep his daughter fed and housed, was doing frantic calculations that never came out positive. A soft knock on the kitchen doorframe made him turn. Faith Gilbert stood there, her plate empty, her expression thoughtful. "Mind if I come in?" "It's a free country," Jasper said, which wasn't exactly an invitation but wasn't a refusal either. Faith stepped into the small kitchen, her eyes scanning the space with that same assessing gaze he had noticed earlier. She saw the commercial stove that had seen better days, the walk-in cooler with its flickering light, the prep station worn smooth from years of use. Her gaze lingered on the knife rack, noting the professional quality blades that seemed at odds with the otherwise modest equipment. "That was the best grilled cheese I've had in years," she said, leaning against the counter. "And I've eaten at a lot of diners across a lot of states." "It's simple food," Jasper replied. "Nothing fancy." "Simple food made well is better than fancy food made poorly," Faith countered. She paused, then added, "You mentioned earlier that you're the owner for another week. Mind if I ask what that meant?" Jasper's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't know this woman, didn't owe her his life story. But something about her direct gaze, and the fact that she had asked rather than pried, made him answer. "Lease is up. Can't make the payment. 7 days until they lock the doors." Faith absorbed this information without visible reaction, though Jasper thought he saw something flicker in those amber eyes. Sympathy, maybe, or recognition. "How much?" she asked bluntly. "That's not why I fed you," Jasper said quickly, his voice sharper than intended. "I'm not looking for charity." "I didn't think you were," Faith replied calmly. "But I've been in tight spots before, and I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is let people know what the fight looks like." Before Jasper could respond, Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, Miss Ella says she can teach me how to draw motorcycles." "Can she, please?" Jasper looked past his daughter to see the blonde tattooed rider standing in the dining room, giving him an apologetic smile, as if to say she hadn't meant to presume. Faith caught his hesitation and spoke gently to Lily. "How about we ask your dad first if it's okay to have drawing lessons? He's been working hard to feed all of us." Lily looked up at her father with those wide eyes that could melt steel. "Can I, Daddy, just for a little while?" Jasper found himself nodding despite every protective instinct telling him to keep his daughter close. "Just for a little while, and you stay where I can see you." Lily squealed with delight and ran back to the dining room, where Ella was already pulling out a sketch pad from her backpack. Faith watched the exchange with a small smile. "You're a good father," she said. "Protective, but not overprotective. That's a hard balance." "She's all I have left," Jasper said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Faith's expression softened. "I lost my dad when I was 16. Motorcycle accident, ironically enough. My mom raised me and my 2 brothers alone after that. I know what it looks like when someone's carrying more weight than they should have to." The admission hung in the air between them, creating a thread of shared understanding. Jasper found himself looking at this woman with new eyes, seeing past the leather vest and the commanding presence to someone who understood loss and responsibility. From the dining room came the sound of laughter, Lily's bright giggles mixing with the deeper voices of the riders. Jasper moved to the doorway and watched as his daughter sat surrounded by 3 of the bikers, all of them leaning over a sketch pad and offering suggestions for how to draw a motorcycle wheel. The woman with silver streaks in her hair had brought over a coloring book and was showing Lily different shading techniques. It was a scene of unexpected warmth, these road-hardened women treating his daughter with a gentleness that made his throat tighten. "We're not what people expect," Faith said, coming to stand beside him. "When folks see a bunch of women on motorcycles, they make assumptions. But the Desert Riders, we're a family. Most of us came to the road because we needed something. Safety, freedom, purpose. And we found it with each other." Jasper nodded slowly, understanding more than she might have realized. "I joined the military for similar reasons," he found himself saying. "Needed structure, needed to be part of something bigger than myself." Faith's head turned sharply toward him. "What branch?" "Navy," Jasper replied, then hesitated before adding, "Special operations." He saw the recognition dawn in her eyes, the way she reassessed him with this new information. But she didn't press for details, didn't ask the questions civilians usually asked. Instead, she simply nodded, respecting the boundary he had drawn. "That explains the way you carry yourself," she said. "I thought I recognized it." The moment stretched between them, comfortable, despite its weight. Outside, the Texas evening had deepened into night, and through the windows, Jasper could see the first stars beginning to appear. Inside the Crossroads Diner, 13 motorcycles sat cooling in the parking lot while 13 women rested and recovered, trusting that this stranger would keep them safe for a few hours. And Jasper Holt, standing in his failing diner, with $47 to his name and 7 days until eviction, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt useful. He felt like he was doing what he had been trained to do, taking care of people who needed it. The cost would come later, the reckoning with empty shelves and empty pockets. But for right now, in this moment, he had made the choice that mattered. Faith seemed to sense his thoughts. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking us in. Not everyone would have." "It's what you do," Jasper replied simply. From the dining room, Lily's voice rang out. "Daddy, look." I drew a motorcycle with flames. Both adults turned to look, and despite everything, despite the weight of impending loss and impossible odds, Jasper smiled. As the night deepened over Dusty Ridge, the Crossroads Diner settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Jasper moved through the space with quiet efficiency, refilling water glasses before they emptied, clearing plates without interrupting conversations, adjusting the struggling air conditioner to direct what little cool air it produced toward the tables where the riders Saturday. He worked without fanfare, without drawing attention to himself, simply doing what needed to be done. The riders noticed. They couldn't help but notice. Faith watched from her position at the center table as Jasper checked on each woman individually, asking if anyone needed anything else, if the dehydrated riders were feeling better, if anyone had dietary restrictions he should know about for the morning. He spoke quietly, respectfully, never hovering but always present. It was the mark of someone trained to assess and respond to needs before they became urgent. One of the younger riders, a woman named Zoe, with dark curly hair and nervous energy, had been struggling with a headache since they arrived. Jasper had noticed her wincing at the overhead lights and brought her a damp cloth without being asked, along with 2 aspirin from the first aid kit he kept behind the counter. He dimmed the lights in her section of the diner and suggested she rest her head on the table for a while. 20 minutes later, when Zoe lifted her head and announced the headache had passed, she looked at Jasper with something approaching awe. "How did you know?" she asked. "Seen a lot of heat exhaustion," Jasper replied simply. "Light sensitivity usually means you need darkness and rest more than anything else." Another rider, Chloe, a mechanic by trade with grease, still faintly visible under her fingernails despite road washing, had noticed the diner's air conditioner struggling. Without asking permission, she had grabbed her toolkit from her bike and approached Jasper. "Mind if I take a look at that unit? Sounds like the compressor's about to give up entirely." Jasper had hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The air conditioner had been limping along for months, and he hadn't had the money to fix it properly. But Chloe's expression held no judgment, only the straightforward competence of someone who saw a problem she could solve. "I'd appreciate that," he said finally. Chloe spent the next 30 minutes elbow deep in the ancient machinery, making adjustments and repairs with parts she cannibalized from her own bike's spare kit. When she finished, the air conditioner hummed with a smooth consistency it hadn't had in over a year. She refused payment, waving off Jasper's attempt to give her $20 from his precious $47. "You fed us when you didn't have to," she said firmly. "This is just paying it forward." The exchange didn't go unnoticed by the other riders, and a quiet conversation started among them about this man who had opened his doors and shared his limited resources without hesitation. Faith found herself studying Jasper with increasing interest. There was something in the way he moved, a precision and economy of motion that spoke of extensive training. The way he positioned himself to always have a clear line of sight to both the dining room and Lily. The way his eyes constantly tracked movement and assessed situations. The way he seemed most comfortable when he was taking care of others. Around 9 in the evening, Lily began to yawn, her earlier excitement giving way to the natural tiredness of a 7-year-old past her bedtime. Jasper noticed immediately and excused himself from a conversation with 2 of the riders to crouch beside his daughter. "Time for bed, sweetheart," he said gently. "But Daddy, Miss Ella was going to show me how to draw a gas tank." Lily protested, though her drooping eyelids betrayed her exhaustion. Ella, who had been Lily's primary companion for the past few hours, smiled warmly. "The gas tank will still be there tomorrow, little artist. Your dad's right, you need your sleep." Jasper scooped Lily up, and she immediately rested her head against his shoulder, her small arms wrapping around his neck. He carried her toward the back hallway, where a small apartment served as their living quarters. As he walked, Faith watched the tenderness in his movements. The way he murmured something soft that made Lily giggle sleepily, the way he supported her weight as if she were the most precious cargo he had ever carried. When he returned 10 minutes later, his expression carried the particular exhaustion of a single parent who had just completed the nightly ritual of teeth brushing, story reading, and tucking in. But there was also peace there, a moment of pure purpose fulfilled. "She's out like a light," he announced to no one in particular. "That girl could sleep through a hurricane once she's down." "She's a sweet kid," Faith said. "You're raising her well." Jasper accepted the compliment with a small nod, but deflected it characteristically. "She raises herself half the time. I just try to keep up." The riders laughed softly at that, recognizing the humble deflection for what it was. As the night progressed, they began sharing more freely, the barriers of stranger anxiety falling away in the comfortable atmosphere Jasper had created. Stories of the road emerged, tales of long rides through desert sunsets, mechanical failures in the middle of nowhere, the camaraderie that formed when women chose freedom over convention. Jasper listened more than he spoke, but when he did contribute, his words carried weight. He shared a story about a time in the Navy when his unit had been stranded in a remote location, how they had relied on local hospitality to survive, and how that experience had taught him that kindness across cultural and social boundaries was one of humanity's greatest strengths. He didn't mention which remote location or what mission had stranded them there, and the riders respected that boundary. Around 11, as some of the riders began to show signs of genuine fatigue, Jasper made a decision that surprised even himself. "There's a storage room in back," he said. "It's not fancy, but I've got some old booth cushions and blankets stored there. If you want to stretch out and actually sleep for a few hours instead of just resting at tables, you're welcome to it." Faith's eyebrows rose. "That's generous, but we don't want to impose more than we already have." "You're not imposing," Jasper said firmly. "You've been on the road for over 12 hours in brutal heat. Your bodies need real rest, not just sitting upright in a booth. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "Chloe fixed my air conditioner. Least I can do is offer you a cool place to sleep." The riders exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening among them. Finally, Faith nodded. "We'll take you up on that. Thank you." Over the next 20 minutes, Jasper transformed the storage room into a makeshift dormitory. He hauled out the old cushions, arranged them on the floor, and distributed every clean blanket he owned. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable, and most importantly, it was cool and safe. The riders settled in with murmured thanks, some of them already half asleep before they lay down. Faith remained in the dining room with Jasper after the others had retired. She helped him wipe down tables and sweep the floor, working in companionable silence. When the cleaning was done, they both poured themselves cups of coffee and sat at the counter, the diner quiet except for the newly efficient hum of the air conditioner. "You didn't have to do all this," Faith said, cradling her mug. "The food would have been enough." Jasper shrugged. "My wife used to say that if you're going to do something, do it right. Half measures just leave everyone uncomfortable." "Your wife," Faith said gently. "Lily mentioned her mom isn't around anymore." "Cancer," Jasper said, the single word carrying years of grief. 2 years ago, it was fast and brutal, And it left Lily and me trying to figure out how to be a family of two when we'd planned on being so much more. Faith was quiet for a moment, respecting the weight of that loss. This place was her dream? Our dream, Jasper corrected. But yeah, mostly hers. She wanted a spot where travelers could find home cooking and locals could gather. A real community hub. For a while, it worked. Then the highway bypass happened, and the customers dried up. And I've been drowning slowly ever since. But you're still feeding strangers with your last supplies, Faith observed. What else would I do? Jasper asked, genuinely puzzled by the question. Turn away 13 women who needed help. That's not who I am. Faith studied him in the dim light of the diner. This man who was facing his own disaster but had chosen to prioritize the needs of others. You know, she said slowly, in all my years leading the Desert Riders, I've met a lot of people. Good people, bad people, and everything in between. But people like you, people who give without counting the cost, they're rare. Jasper looked uncomfortable with the praise. I'm just doing what anyone would do. No, Faith said firmly. You're doing what very few people would do. Most folks see 13 bikers roll up, they lock their doors. You opened yours and emptied your kitchen. They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and listening to the night sounds of Texas filtering through the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The air conditioner hummed its newly smooth rhythm, and in the storage room behind them, 13 women slept peacefully, trusting that the stranger who had fed them would keep them safe through the night. What neither of them knew was that by morning, everything would change. The careful distance Jasper maintained around his past, the mystery of who he had been before becoming a struggling diner owner and single father, would be revealed in a moment neither could predict. And that revelation would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just the Crossroads Diner, but everyone connected to it. For now, though, there was just coffee and quiet conversation. Two people who had walked difficult roads finding unexpected common ground in a small diner on a hot Texas night. Dawn arrived over Dusty Ridge, like a painting in shades of pink and gold. The early morning light spilling across the flat Texas landscape with a gentleness that belied the heat that would follow. Inside the Crossroads Diner, Jasper woke from a brief sleep taken in one of the dining booths, his body instinctively alert to the unfamiliar sounds of 13 other people breathing in his space. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind, then memory returned and with it, the reality of what he had done. He had fed and sheltered 13 strangers with resources he couldn't afford to spare. He rose quietly, his joints protesting slightly from sleeping on vinyl instead of a proper bed, and moved toward the kitchen. The morning routine called to him, a familiar pattern that might restore some sense of normalcy. But as he passed the storage room, he heard voices, low and already awake. The Desert Riders were early risers, it seemed. By the time Jasper had coffee brewing and was assessing what breakfast he could possibly assemble from his depleted supplies, Faith emerged from the storage room looking remarkably refreshed considering she had slept on cushions on a floor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and her amber eyes were sharp and observant. "Morning," she said. "Please tell me you're not about to cook breakfast for 13 people with whatever's left in that kitchen." Jasper paused in the act of pulling out a carton of eggs, one of his last. "I was considering it." Faith crossed her arms, and for the first time since meeting her, Jasper saw real sternness in her expression. "Jasper, you fed us dinner. You gave us shelter. You shared blankets and space you probably need for yourself. At some point, charity becomes self-destruction." "It's not charity," Jasper replied, echoing what he had said the night before. "It's hospitality." "It's bankruptcy," Faith countered. She moved closer, lowering her voice. "I saw that eviction notice last night when I was helping you clean. It was sticking out from under the register. You've got 7 days and probably negative money in the bank, and you're about to cook your last eggs for a bunch of strangers who could just as easily grab breakfast at a gas station down the road." Jasper's jaw tightened. He didn't like being seen through so clearly. "What would you have me do? Send you away hungry?" "I'd have you let us help," Faith said. Before Jasper could protest, she held up a hand. "Chloe already fixed your air conditioner. Ella noticed your front door sticks and wants to plane it down. And I guarantee you that if I asked the crew, half of them would offer skills you need. We're not charity cases, and neither are you. We're people who can help each other." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an offer all at once. Jasper found himself at a loss, his carefully maintained independence suddenly feeling more like stubborn pride. Before he could formulate a response, other riders began emerging from the storage room, stretching and greeting the morning with the easy camaraderie of people who had traveled together for a long time. Zoe was among the first out, looking significantly better than she had the night before. She spotted Jasper and immediately approached. "Hey, thank you again for last night. That headache would have turned into a migraine if you hadn't caught it early." She paused, then added, "You know, that's a medic's instinct. Recognizing the early signs. You served, didn't you?" Jasper hesitated, old habits of operational security warring with the openness these women seemed to inspire. "Navy," he said finally, offering the minimum. "My brother's Navy," Zoe said, her face lighting up. "He's on a carrier in the Pacific." "What did you do?" "Different things," Jasper said vaguely, turning back toward the coffee pot. But he could feel multiple sets of eyes on him now. Curiosity piqued. Chloe, wiping sleep from her eyes, joined the conversation. "Different things is what people say when the things were classified. I've got 3 cousins in special operations. They all talk around their service the same way you just did." Jasper poured coffee with steady hands, but internally, he felt the walls he had built around his past beginning to crack. These women were perceptive, probably more perceptive than he had given them credit for. Faith watched the exchange with increasing interest, pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. "The way you move," she said quietly, drawing his attention. "It's not standard Navy. The situational awareness, the way you checked those exit routes last night, the way you positioned yourself to always see the whole room. That's advanced training." "A lot of sailors get good training," Jasper deflected. "Not like that," Faith pressed gently. "My dad was Marine Recon before he died. I grew up around operators. I know what it looks like." The kitchen had gone quiet. Other conversations, trailing off, as the riders sensed something significant happening. Jasper felt cornered, not aggressively but unavoidably, by women who genuinely cared and whose respect he had earned. He set down the coffee pot and met Faith's gaze directly. "I did my time. I served with good people. And when my wife got sick, I came home to be a father. That's all that matters now." Faith held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But just so you know, whatever you did, whoever you were, it shows in how you take care of people. That doesn't go away." The moment broke as Lily's voice called from the back hallway. "Daddy, are the motorcycle ladies still here?" "We're still here, little artist," Ella called back, and Lily appeared moments later, her hair a tangled mess, wearing pajamas decorated with stars. She brightened when she saw the riders and immediately began chattering about dreams she had of motorcycles that could fly. The morning progressed with an easy rhythm. Despite Jasper's protests, the riders insisted on buying breakfast from the gas station 2 miles down the road, sending 3 bikes to return with bags of breakfast tacos, fruit, and orange juice. They spread the feast across the diner tables and invited Jasper and Lily to join them, making it clear that this was a shared meal, not charity. As they ate, Jasper found himself relaxing incrementally, drawn into conversations about routes and destinations, the best roads in America, the worst weather they had ridden through. Lily sat on Ella's lap, helping her plan a route on a paper map with colored pencils, drawing little stars at places that sounded interesting. But Faith continued to observe Jasper with a thoughtful expression. She noticed things others might miss. The way his eyes tracked movement outside the window, identifying vehicles before they came into full view, the way he unconsciously checked his watch at regular intervals, an internal chronometer still ticking from years of operations, the way he held his coffee mug, 3 fingers instead of the handle, ready to set it down and move if necessary. After breakfast, while others were packing gear and preparing bikes for the road, Faith approached Jasper one more time. They stood near the front window, watching Lily help Ella check tire pressure on one of the motorcycles under careful supervision. "Can I ask you something?" Faith said. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "You can ask," Jasper replied neutrally. "That eviction notice says you owe $8,500. But this diner, even struggling, should generate more than that over a few months." "What happened?" Jasper was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of accumulated defeats. "Medical bills from Sarah's illness. Insurance covered some, but not enough. I've been paying those down while trying to keep the diner afloat. Last month I had to choose between the medical debt and the lease payment. I chose the medical debt because it felt more important to honor what was spent trying to save her. That put me behind, and behind turned into too far behind to catch up." Faith absorbed this, her expression softening. "So you're not just trying to save a business. You're trying to keep a promise to your wife." "And give Lily a stable home," Jasper added. "She's already lost her mother. I can't let her lose her home too." Before Faith could respond, Chloe called from the parking lot. "Boss, we should probably hit the road soon if we want to make El Paso by tonight." Faith nodded acknowledgement, but didn't move immediately. She looked at Jasper with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You know," she said slowly, "the Desert Riders. We're not just a riding club. We help women in crisis, women fleeing bad situations, women who need a network. But we've also been known to help good people who find themselves in impossible situations through no fault of their own." "I'm not looking for handouts," Jasper said reflexively. "I know you're not," Faith replied. "But sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is accept help when it's offered by people who genuinely want to give it." She held his gaze for another beat, then smiled slightly. "Think about it. We'll be in El Paso for 3 days for the rally. After that, we're routing back through this way. Maybe we'll stop by again, see how things are going." Jasper found himself nodding, unsure what else to do. As Faith walked toward her bike, he felt a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude for her kindness, anxiety about his situation, and something else he couldn't quite name, a sense that this encounter with 13 strangers on motorcycles meant something more than just a single night of hospitality. The riders mounted their bikes with practiced efficiency, engines rumbling to life one by one. Lily waved enthusiastically from the doorway, and each rider waved back or blew her a kiss. Faith was the last to start her engine. She looked back at Jasper one more time, and he saw something in her expression. A decision forming, a plan taking shape. Then they were gone. 13 motorcycles pulling out onto the empty highway in formation, their engines fading gradually into the distance until only dust and memory remained. Jasper stood in the parking lot with Lily beside him, watching until the last bike disappeared over the horizon. "I liked them," Lily said simply. "Me too," Jasper admitted. What he didn't know was that as Faith led her crew down the highway toward El Paso, she was already composing a message in her mind. One that would go out to every chapter of the Desert Riders across the Southwest. In that message would be a story about a Navy veteran and single father who had shared his last resources with strangers, who was 7 days from losing everything, and who embodied the kind of quiet courage the Desert Riders had sworn to protect. The wheels of something larger than Jasper could imagine were already beginning to turn. 3 hours after the Desert Riders departed, the Crossroads Diner settled into an unusual quiet. Jasper worked through his morning routine with mechanical efficiency, but his mind churned with the reality of his situation. The riders had been generous in their own way, refusing to let him cook breakfast and instead sharing what they had brought from the gas station. But that didn't change the fundamental math. His supplies were critically low, his cash reserves nearly non-existent, and the clock was still ticking down to eviction. Lily played contentedly in her corner booth, drawing elaborate scenes of motorcycle adventures, seemingly untroubled by the weight pressing down on her father. Jasper envied her that innocence, even as he worked desperately to preserve it. He was wiping down the counter for the third time when he heard the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle engine approaching. His first thought was that one of the riders had forgotten something or had mechanical trouble. But when he looked through the window, he saw only a single bike, and the rider wasn't dressed in the desert rider's black leather. This was someone else, a large man in worn denim and a faded veteran's cap pulling into the parking lot. The rider dismounted, with the stiff movements of someone whose joints had seen hard miles. As he approached the door, Jasper could make out more details. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. A weathered face that spoke of years under the Sunday, and walking with a slight limp that Jasper recognized, the gait of someone carrying old combat injuries. The man entered the diner, pausing to remove his sunglasses and let his eyes adjust to the dimmer interior. When his gaze found Jasper, something flickered across his expression, recognition maybe, or assessment. "Morning," the man said, his voice gravelly but friendly. "You open for lunch?" Jasper glanced at the clock. It was barely 11, but he nodded. "Can be. What are you hungry for?" "Whatever you've got that's hot and filling," the man replied, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Been riding since dawn, and my stomach's starting to complain." As Jasper moved toward the kitchen to see what he could assemble, the man spoke again. "Name's Patrick Bowen. By the way, I was Navy back in the day. Saw the flag sticker on your register and figured you might be a fellow veteran." Jasper turned back, noting the small American flag decal he had placed on the ancient cash register years ago, a subtle nod to his service that he rarely thought about anymore. Jasper Holt, Navy as well. Patrick's eyes sharpened with interest. "What did you do in the Navy, Jasper?" The question was casual, the kind of thing veterans asked each other all the time. But something in the way Patrick asked it, a certain intentionality, made Jasper cautious. "Little bit of everything. You?" "Submarines, mostly," Patrick said. 22 years under the water before they pensioned me off with bad knees and good stories." He paused, then added, "But I've got friends who did other things. More interesting things, if you catch my meaning." Jasper felt the familiar wariness return. He nodded noncommittally and focused on preparing food, pulling together a burger and fries from his limited supplies. As he cooked, Patrick continued talking, his voice carrying the easy cadence of someone used to filling silence. "Funny thing about small diners on back highways," Patrick said. "They're the kind of places where interesting people end up. Had a friend once who ran a little restaurant after he retired from the teams. SEAL guy, always said the transition to civilian life was harder than any mission he'd run." Jasper's hands paused for just a fraction of a second, so briefly that most people wouldn't notice. But Patrick noticed. The old man's eyes tracked the tiny hesitation, and a small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "The teams produce a specific kind of person," Patrick continued, his voice lower now. "They move a certain way, think a certain way. My friend, he could be standing in a kitchen cooking burgers, but you could tell he was always aware of every exit, every potential threat, every person in his space. Habits like that don't fade." Jasper plated the burger and set it in front of Patrick without comment. The old man looked at the food appreciatively, then back up at Jasper. "This looks great. Mind if I ask one more question before I eat?" "Free country," Jasper replied, echoing what he had said to Faith the previous night. "You ever been to a place called Dusty Ridge before you opened this diner?" "I grew up here," Jasper said carefully. "Left for the Navy, came back after my wife died." Patrick nodded slowly, taking a bite of his burger. After he swallowed, he said, "Fair enough. I ask because I got a call this morning from a woman named Faith Gilbert. She's the captain of a motorcycle club called the Desert Riders. You know her? Jasper's guard went up completely. She was here last night. Her crew needed shelter from the heat. She told me, Patrick said. Also told me about a Navy veteran who fed 13 strangers with his last supplies, gave them shelter, took care of them without asking for anything in return. She thought I might want to know about that, seeing as how I run a veteran support network across 3 states. The pieces clicked into place for Jasper. This wasn't a random stop. Faith had sent this man, had somehow connected him to a network Jasper hadn't known existed. I don't need charity, he said, his voice tight. Nobody said anything about charity, Patrick replied calmly. But Faith also mentioned you're about a week from losing this place. And she mentioned you move like someone with advanced training. So I figured I'd ride out here myself and see what's what. He took another bite of burger, chewed thoughtfully, then said, "This is damn good food, by the way." Jasper leaned against the counter, arms crossed, defensive posture clear. "What do you want, Patrick?" "I want to know if you were a SEAL," Patrick said bluntly. "Because if you were, you're part of a brotherhood that doesn't let its own go down without a fight. And if you weren't, well, I'll finish my burger and be on my way with no hard feelings." The direct question hung in the air like a physical weight. Jasper thought about deflecting again, about maintaining the walls he had built around that part of his life. But something in Patrick's weathered face, the genuine concern mixed with respect, made those walls feel less necessary. Before Jasper could answer, the universe made the decision for him. Lily, who had been quietly coloring in her booth, suddenly called out, "Daddy, it's hot. Can you fix the air conditioner?" Jasper turned automatically, moving toward the thermostat, but as he reached up to adjust it, his sleeve pulled back, revealing more of his forearm than usual. And there, stark against his tan skin, was the unmistakable ink of a Navy SEAL trident tattoo. The eagle, the anchor, the pistol, the trident itself, all rendered in precise black lines that no amount of sun or time could fade. Patrick saw it, his eyes went directly to the tattoo, and his entire demeanor shifted. He straightened on his stool, his casual posture replaced with something approaching attention. "Well," he said quietly, "there's my answer." Jasper looked down at his exposed forearm, realized what had happened, and felt a strange mixture of resignation and relief. The secret he had kept carefully guarded, the identity he had wrapped in vague answers and deflections, was now visible. He slowly rolled his sleeve back down, but the gesture felt pointless. The revelation had occurred. "How long?" Patrick asked, his voice carrying a different quality now, respect mixed with understanding. 8 years active, Jasper replied, knowing there was no point in hiding anymore. "Multiple deployments. Left when Sarah got sick. Haven't talked about it much since." Patrick stood up from his stool, and despite his age and his limp, he moved with purpose. He extended his hand across the counter. "It's an honor," he said simply. "Truly." Jasper shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of another warrior, even if from a different branch and era. "It was a lifetime ago," he said. "It's never a lifetime ago," Patrick countered. "That training, that brotherhood, it's permanent. Which is exactly why Faith called me. She recognized what you are, even if you didn't confirm it for her. And she knew that once I verified it, the network would mobilize." "The network?" Jasper asked, though part of him already understood. "Veterans helping veterans," Patrick explained. "We've got connections across every state, every major city. Resources, funds, skills. When one of our own is in trouble, especially someone who served at your level, we respond." He paused, his expression serious. "Jasper, you're 7 days from losing this diner, but you're also 1 phone call away from having more help than you know what to do with. The question is whether you're ready to accept it." Jasper stood silent, the weight of years of independence and pride pressing down on him. He had been trained to be self-sufficient, to complete missions without support, to never be a burden. But he also thought of Lily, of the promise he made to Sarah, of the home they had built together that was about to be torn away. "I don't know how to ask for help," he admitted quietly. Patrick smiled, a warm expression that crinkled the crinkly corners of his eyes. Then it's a good thing I'm here to do the asking for you. As of right now, consider the network activated. By tomorrow morning, you're going to have more support than you ever thought possible. From her booth, Lily called out again. Daddy, who's that man? Is he one of the motorcycle people? Jasper looked at his daughter, then back at Patrick, then down at his forearm where the sealed trident remained hidden beneath his sleeve but no longer secret. Yeah, sweetheart, he called back. He's one of the motorcycle people. And as Patrick pulled out his phone and began making calls, Jasper felt the first real stirring of hope he had experienced in months. The revelation he had tried so hard to avoid had become the catalyst for something he couldn't yet fully comprehend. His identity as a former Navy SEAL, the part of himself he had buried beneath the role of father and diner owner, was about to change everything. Outside, the Texas sun climbed higher, promising another day of brutal heat. But inside the Crossroads Diner, a different kind of warmth was spreading. The warmth of brotherhood and the unbreakable bonds between those who had served. By late afternoon, the Crossroads Diner had transformed into something Jasper had never experienced. Patrick Bowen's phone calls had rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, and the responses came back in waves. Within 2 hours, 5 more motorcycles arrived, each carrying a veteran who had received word through the network. They came from nearby towns and distant cities, dropping everything to answer a call that transcended ordinary friendship. The first to arrive was a woman in her 50s, named Delilah Fox, a former Army medic with silver hair cut military short. She rode a vintage Harley that gleamed like polished obsidian and carried herself with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had spent years in field hospitals. Behind her came 2 Marines, brothers named Corey Daniels and Seth Newman, both in their 30s, both carrying the quiet intensity of men who had seen combat and come home changed but not broken. The fourth arrival was Brandon Ellis, a former Air Force pararescue specialist whose easy smile belied the intensity in his eyes. And finally, Alec Jennings appeared on a custom-built touring bike, an ex-Army Ranger who now worked as a contractor, but still answered the call when brothers and sisters in arms needed support. They gathered in the diner not as strangers, but as a family reunited by purpose. Patrick made introductions, though formal names seemed almost unnecessary. These were people who understood each other on a level that went beyond words, connected by shared sacrifice and a code that didn't end when uniforms came off. Jasper stood behind the counter, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of people who had come because of him, because of what he represented. Lily emerged from the back room where she had been napping, rubbing sleep from her eyes and staring wide-eyed at the collection of motorcycles now filling the parking lot. "Daddy, are we having a party?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular excitement only a 7-year-old could muster. Delilah, closest to Lily, crouched down to her level with a warm smile. "Something like that, sweetheart. We're here to visit your dad and maybe help out a little bit. Is that okay with you?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, then spotted the medical insignia on Delilah's jacket. "Are you a doctor?" "I used to be a medic in the Army," Delilah explained. "I helped people when they were hurt." "Like a superhero," Lily declared with absolute certainty. The room erupted in warm laughter, and the tension that had been building in Jasper's shoulders eased slightly. These people weren't here to judge him or make him feel inadequate. They were here because he was one of them, and that meant something profound. Patrick called everyone to gather around the largest table, and what followed was a sharing circle unlike anything Jasper had experienced since leaving active duty. One by one, the veterans began telling their stories, not the sanitized versions they shared with civilians, but the real, raw truths of service and sacrifice. Corey spoke about losing half his unit in an IED attack and the survivor's guilt that haunted him for years afterward. Seth, his brother, talked about how Corey had saved his life by pulling him from a burning vehicle, and how that debt could never be repaid but had bonded them permanently. Brandon shared the story of a rescue mission gone wrong, where he had to choose between saving equipment or saving a life, and how that choice still woke him up some nights in a cold sweat. Delilah's story was different but no less powerful. She described holding the hands of young soldiers as they died, being the last face they saw, the last voice they heard. "You carry those faces with you forever," she said quietly. "Every single one becomes part of who you are." When the circle came to Jasper, he felt the weight of all those eyes on him, expectant but not demanding. For years, he had kept his service locked away, a chapter of his life he visited only in nightmares. But sitting among people who understood, he found words beginning to flow. "I was a SEAL for 8 years," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "I did things I'm proud of and things that still keep me up at night. I lost teammates who were more like brothers than friends. And when my wife got sick, when I had to choose between the teams and being there for her and our daughter, it felt like losing part of myself." He paused, looking at Lily, who sat on Delilah's lap, listening with serious eyes. "But I'd make that choice again in a heartbeat. Sarah needed me. Lily needed me. And this diner, it was supposed to be our way of staying connected to community, of building something that mattered after all the years of tearing things down." Patrick placed a hand on Jasper's shoulder. "You didn't stop serving. You just changed your mission." The simple statement hit Jasper with unexpected force. He had spent 2 years feeling like he had abandoned something essential, like coming home meant giving up his identity as a warrior. But Patrick's words reframed everything. Taking care of Lily, keeping the diner open, feeding strangers who needed help, those were all forms of service too. Alex spoke next, sharing his own struggle with transitioning to civilian life, how he had felt lost and purposeless until he found work that allowed him to use his skills in new ways. "The mission doesn't end," he said. "It just evolves. What you're doing here, feeding people, creating a community space, that matters just as much as anything we did in uniform." Lily, who had been quietly absorbing the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. "My daddy makes the best food in Texas. And he reads me stories every night. And he taught me how to be brave when I'm scared." She looked around the table with complete seriousness. "I think that's pretty important." The room fell silent for a moment, and then Delilah hugged Lily close, her eyes bright with tears. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. That's the most important job in the world." As the afternoon wore on, the conversation shifted from heavy topics to lighter ones. Stories of training mishaps and military humor emerged, the kind of tales that only veterans could fully appreciate. Brandon recounted a parachute malfunction that should have been terrifying but ended up being absurdly funny. Seth and Corey traded stories about their drill instructor who had terrorized them but ultimately shaped them into Marines. Jasper found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in months. The weight he had been carrying felt lighter, not because his problems had disappeared, but because he was no longer carrying them alone. These people understood him in ways that civilians never could. They had walked similar paths, faced similar demons, and emerged with the same determination to keep moving forward. As evening approached and the Texas sky turned shades of orange and purple, Lily presented each veteran with a drawing she had made during their stories. For Patrick, she drew a submarine surrounded by fish. For Delilah, a medic helping a soldier. For each person, she had captured something essential about their story in her simple, heartfelt way. The veterans accepted these drawings like precious gifts, carefully folding them and tucking them into pockets or saddlebags. Brandon held his drawing, which showed a parachute in the shape of a heart, and said with genuine emotion, "I'm going to frame this and put it on my wall." As darkness settled over Dusty Ridge, the group stood together outside the diner, united by stories, shared and bonds strengthened. Jasper looked at these people who had been strangers hours ago and felt a connection deeper than casual friendship. They were his tribe, his family, in a way that transcended blood. And tomorrow, Patrick had promised, the real mobilization would begin. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep and the visiting veterans had departed to find lodging at a motel 10 miles down the highway, Patrick and Jasper sat alone in the quiet diner. The neon sign outside flickered its tired rhythm, casting alternating shadows across the empty tables. Patrick had his phone out, scrolling through messages that had been arriving steadily since his initial calls that afternoon. "You need to understand something," Patrick said, his weathered face serious in the dim light. "What's about to happen is going to feel overwhelming. When the veteran network activates for someone who served at your level, the response is massive. We're talking about people from 6 states mobilizing resources, money, time, and skills. Are you ready for that?" Jasper gripped his coffee mug, feeling the warmth seep into his hands. "I don't know if I have a choice. 7 days isn't enough time for me to fix this on my own." "You always have a choice," Patrick corrected gently. "But I'm glad you're willing to accept help, because what I'm about to do is send out a call that will reach every veteran organization, every motorcycle club, every support network from here to California. By morning, this diner is going to be the center of something bigger than you can imagine." He began, typing on his phone, his thick fingers moving with surprising dexterity across the screen. "I'm writing this carefully," he explained as he worked. "I'm telling them about a Navy SEAL who left the teams to care for his dying wife and raise his daughter alone. About a man who opened a diner as a community space, honoring his wife's dream. About someone who just fed and sheltered 13 strangers with resources he couldn't afford to share. And about how he's 7 days from losing everything because he chose to pay medical bills instead of rent." Jasper listened as Patrick continued. "I'm telling them that this is a brother who needs his family. That we have 1 week to save not just a business, but a home for a little girl who's already lost her mother. And I'm telling them that every dollar contributed, every hour of labor donated, every skill offered, goes directly toward keeping this light burning." Patrick paused, reading over what he had written. Then he looked up at Jasper. "Last chance to back out. Once I send this, there's no stopping what comes next." Jasper thought of Lily sleeping in the back room, of Sarah's dream dying along with her memory, of the eviction notice that felt like a death sentence. He thought of Faith and the Desert Riders, of the stories shared that afternoon, of the feeling of being part of something larger than himself again. "Send it," he said quietly. Patrick's finger hovered over the send button for one more moment, then pressed down. The message flew into the digital ether, carrying with it a call to arms that would echo across the Southwest. Within minutes, the first responses began arriving. "Phoenix Veterans Coalition. We're in. How much do you need?" "San Antonio Riders. Mobilizing a convoy. Will arrive by noon tomorrow." "El Paso Military Support Network. Standing by for deployment orders." The messages came faster, each one representing individuals, groups, and organizations ready to help. Patrick's phone buzzed continuously as veterans from all branches, all eras, all walks of life responded to the call. Some offered money. Others offered skills in construction, accounting, marketing, or legal services. Several motorcycle clubs announced they were organizing supply runs. Faith Gilbert's response came through within 20 minutes. "Desert Riders reversing course. We'll be there by dawn with full crew and every chapter we can reach. This is our priority mission now." Patrick showed Jasper the flood of responses, his eyes bright with satisfaction. "This is what we do. This is who we are. When one of our own needs help, the entire family responds." By midnight, Patrick had coordinated responses from over 40 different organizations and individuals. A spreadsheet had been created tracking commitments, financial donations already totaling over $15,000, pledges of labor from contractors and electricians, offers of food supplies from restaurant owners who were veterans themselves, and even legal assistance from a JAG officer who had retired to practice civilian law. "The Desert Riders are bringing their full network," Patrick explained, scrolling through messages. "That's not just the 13 who were here yesterday. That's every chapter from here to the California coast. We're looking at potentially 200 motorcycles arriving over the next few days." Jasper felt his throat tighten. 200. At least, Patrick confirmed. "And they're not coming empty-handed. Faith is organizing supply chains, food donations, equipment." She's treating this like a military operation, because that's what it is. A mission to save one of our own. As the night deepened, more responses arrived. A veteran-owned roofing company in Austin offered to repair the diner's aging roof for free. A former Navy chef who now ran a catering business pledged to supply a week's worth of food. A legal aid society specializing in veteran affairs offered to negotiate with the property owner and review Jasper's lease terms. Patrick made call after call, coordinating efforts, organizing arrival times, ensuring that the massive influx of help would be structured rather than chaotic. He spoke with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, who understood how to transform goodwill into effective action. Around 2 in the morning, Patrick finally set down his phone and rubbed his tired eyes. "Tomorrow is going to change your life," he said simply. "By this time tomorrow night, your problems are going to be solved and you're going to have a community behind you that will never let you fall again." Jasper didn't know what to say. The magnitude of what was happening felt surreal. He had spent months struggling alone, watching his world slowly collapse, believing that asking for help was weakness. Now, because of a single revealed tattoo and one phone call, an army of support was mobilizing on his behalf. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why do all this for someone you barely know?" Patrick's answer was immediate and certain. "Because you're one of us. Because you served with honor. Because you sacrificed for your family. Because you gave your last resources to help strangers. And because when one veteran falls, we all fall a little bit. We save each other because that's what family does." As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and pink, Jasper stood at the window of his diner, watching the empty highway. But he knew it wouldn't be empty for long. Soon, that road would fill with motorcycles and trucks, with people and purpose, with the thundering arrival of a community coming to save one of their own. Behind him, Patrick dozed in a booth, his phone still clutched in his hand, still receiving messages from across the Southwest. And in the back room, Lily slept peacefully, unaware that by the time she woke, her world would be transformed by the unstoppable force of veterans taking care of their own. The mobilization was complete. Now came the thunder. Dawn broke over Dusty Ridge with a clarity that seemed almost prophetic. Jasper stood in the parking lot of the Crossroads Diner, coffee mug in hand, watching the eastern horizon as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and golds. The morning air still held a hint of coolness before the Texas heat would assert itself. Behind him, Patrick emerged from the diner, having caught a few hours of sleep in one of the booths. "They'll start arriving soon," Patrick said, checking his phone. "First wave is about 30 minutes out." As if summoned by his words, a distant sound began to build on the northern horizon. It started as a low rumble, barely distinguishable from wind or distant thunder, but it grew steadily, unmistakably, into the synchronized roar of multiple motorcycle engines. Jasper felt the vibration through the ground before he could clearly see the approaching convoy. Then they appeared, cresting the slight rise in the highway like a vision from another world. Motorcycles stretched in formation, as far as the eye could see, at least 50 in the first wave alone. The Desert Riders led the formation, Faith Gilbert at the point, her black leather vest and dark hair unmistakable even at a distance. Behind her, the bikes rolled in precise columns, chrome and steel catching the morning light, like a river of metal flowing towards salvation. The sound built to a crescendo that rattled the windows of the diner. Lily appeared at the door, awakened by the thunder, her eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, what's happening?" "Help is arriving, sweetheart," Jasper said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite name. The first wave pulled into the parking lot with practiced precision, filling every available space before overflowing onto the shoulder of the highway. Engines cut one by one, leaving a profound silence that felt almost sacred after the roar. Riders dismounted, removing helmets to reveal faces of every age and background, united by purpose. Faith approached first, her stride confident and purposeful. She extended her hand to Jasper, and when he took it, she pulled him into a brief, fierce embrace instead. "We came back," she said simply, "and we brought everyone." Behind the motorcycles, trucks began arriving. Pickups loaded with lumber, panel vans filled with tools, box trucks carrying supplies. Veterans emerged from every vehicle, some in motorcycle leathers, others in casual clothes, but all moving with the same determined energy. Patrick stepped forward, raising his voice to address the growing crowd. Listen up. We have 7 days to save this diner and this family. That means we work smart and we work together. I need skilled contractors over here, electricians and plumbers to the left, anyone with restaurant or business experience by the entrance. The crowd organized itself with military efficiency. Within minutes, teams had formed around different tasks. A group of contractors began assessing the building's structural needs, walking the perimeter and taking notes. Electricians disappeared inside to evaluate the wiring. A former Marine who now owned a restaurant chain in Arizona took over the kitchen, inventorying supplies and planning menu improvements. More waves arrived throughout the morning. The second convoy brought nearly 75 motorcycles from chapters across New Mexico and West Texas. The third wave, arriving just before noon, included riders from as far as Nevada and Southern California. By early afternoon, the parking lot and surrounding area held over 200 motorcycles, their collective presence transforming the lonely highway stop into something resembling a festival. But this was no party. This was a mission, executed with the precision of a military operation. Teams worked simultaneously on multiple fronts. The roof crew tore off old shingles and began laying new weatherproof material. Inside, painters refreshed walls while electricians rewired outdated fixtures. The ancient air conditioning unit that Chloe had temporarily fixed was replaced entirely with a new, energy-efficient system donated by a veteran-owned HVAC company. Delilah organized a medical station, checking on workers for heat exhaustion and treating minor injuries. Brandon coordinated logistics, ensuring supplies reached the right teams at the right times. The Newman brothers, Corey and Seth, led a landscaping crew that transformed the scrubby parking lot borders into neat, welcoming spaces with drought-resistant plants. Faith found Jasper mid-afternoon, standing somewhat dazed by the scope of activity swirling around him. "You okay?" she asked, concern evident in her amber eyes. "I don't know what I am," Jasper admitted. Grateful, overwhelmed, confused about why all these people care. "They care because you're worth caring about," Faith said firmly. "And because this is what community means. Real community. Not the hollow kind. When we say we take care of our own, this is what that looks like." A woman approached carrying an envelope, one of dozens of veterans who had contributed financially. "This is from the San Antonio chapter," she said, pressing it into Jasper's hands. $3,000. "We heard you needed 8,500 total. I think you'll find we've exceeded that target." Indeed, by late afternoon, Patrick announced that financial contributions had reached $22,000, far more than needed to cover the lease debt, with enough left over to create an emergency fund for future struggles. The property owner, contacted by the veteran legal team, had agreed to not only accept the payment, but to restructure the lease with more favorable terms. Impressed, and perhaps intimidated by the overwhelming show of support, Lily moved through the crowd like a small ambassador, offering drawings to workers and receiving in return smiles, hair ruffles, and promises to come back and visit. Ella taught her how to properly thank each team for their work, and Lily took the responsibility seriously, making rounds with solemn gratitude that charmed every hardened veteran she encountered. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in purples and pinks, the transformation was nearly complete. The Crossroads Diner looked reborn. Fresh paint gleamed on walls and trim. New shingles covered the roof. Updated lighting, fixtures cast warm, welcoming glows. The parking lot, cleared and releveled, could accommodate twice as many vehicles as before. Even the tired neon sign had been repaired and now burned bright and steady. Patrick called everyone together as evening approached. Over 200 people gathered in and around the diner, faces tired but satisfied, united by the knowledge of work well done. He stood on the diner's front step, Jasper beside him, Lily in her father's arms. "Today," Patrick announced, his gravelly voice carrying across the assembled crowd. We didn't just save a diner. We proved that the bonds forged in service never break. We demonstrated that when one of our own falls, an army rises to lift them back up. This place, the Crossroads Diner, is now officially a recognized stop on every veteran motorcycle route in the Southwest. A safe haven, a place of welcome, a reminder that we take care of our family. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Motorcycle engines fired up in celebration, creating a thunderous symphony that echoed across the Texas landscape. Faith stepped forward and handed Jasper a plaque that read, "Crossroads Diner, a veteran safe haven, established with honor, maintained with brotherhood." Jasper tried to speak, to express gratitude that felt too large for words. His voice broke on the first attempt. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I spent 2 years thinking I was alone, thinking that leaving the teams meant leaving behind everything that defined me. Today, you showed me that brotherhood doesn't end. That service takes many forms. That family isn't just blood, it's choice. You chose me, chose my daughter, chose to care when you had every reason to stay away. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you've given us." He paused, looking at Lily, then at Faith, then at the sea of faces before him. "This diner will always be open to those who need it. Any veteran, any traveler, anyone struggling, the light will stay on and the door will stay open. That's my promise to you, and to Sarah's memory." The applause that followed felt like thunder and warmth combined. As darkness settled over Dusty Ridge, the parking lot became an impromptu celebration. Food appeared from seemingly nowhere. Grills fired up. Music played from bike speakers. The Crossroads Diner, once dying in isolation, now pulsed with more life than it had ever known. Jasper stood amid it all, his daughter asleep against his shoulder, watching his family, this chosen family of veterans and riders, celebrate not just his salvation but the power of community itself. The transformation was complete, and tomorrow, when the convoy dispersed and the riders returned to their roads, the Crossroads Diner would stand as a permanent testament to what happens when good people refuse to let one of their own fall. 6 months later, the Crossroads Diner stood as a beacon along the Texas highway, its renovated structure gleaming under the autumn Sunday. The neon sign, now reading, "Crossroads Diner, a veteran safe haven," burned bright even in daylight, a symbol of resilience and community that had become known across the Southwest. Inside, the lunch rush was in full swing, tables filled with a mix of local regulars, passing travelers, and veterans who had heard about the place where one of their own had been saved by the Brotherhood. Jasper moved through the bustling space with practiced ease, balancing plates and greeting customers by name. His movements still carried that same military precision, but now there was lightness to them, a peace that had been absent for years. The financial burden that had nearly crushed him was gone, replaced by a thriving business that had become more than just a diner. It was a gathering place, a support center, a living testament to what community could accomplish. Lily, now 8 years old, and growing more confident by the day, sat at the corner booth doing homework while simultaneously greeting every veteran who walked through the door. She had appointed herself the official welcomer, maintaining a guest book where riders signed their names and left messages. The book was already on its 3rd volume, filled with stories and gratitude from people whose lives had been touched by this place. The kitchen had been transformed under the guidance of veteran chef consultants who had taught Jasper new techniques and helped him develop a menu that honored Sarah's original vision while expanding it. The walk-in cooler stayed well-stocked now, thanks to regular supply donations from veteran-owned food distributors who had made the Crossroads a permanent stop on their routes. But the most significant change wasn't visible in the renovations or the thriving business. It was in Jasper himself. The isolation that had defined his post-military life had been replaced by connection. Patrick Bowen stopped by twice a month, always bringing news of other veterans who needed support, turning the diner into an informal coordination center for the regional network. The desert riders made the Crossroads a regular stop on their routes, Faith Gilbert's visits becoming increasingly frequent and increasingly personal. As if summoned by thought, the familiar rumble of motorcycles announced an arrival. Jasper looked through the window to see Faith leading a group of 7 riders into the parking lot. His heart did that small skip it always did when she appeared. A feeling he had finally admitted to himself meant something deeper than friendship. Faith entered with her characteristic confidence, but her smile when she saw Jasper was warm and unguarded. She had become a regular fixture in his life and Lily's, her visits extending from hours to days, her presence shifting from helper to partner in ways both business and personal. "Brought some friends who wanted to see the famous crossroads," she announced, gesturing to the riders behind her. "And I brought something else." She produced a folder from her jacket. "Legal papers. The property owner has agreed to sell you this building and the land. The Veteran Fund has covered half the purchase price as a grant. The other half can be paid over 10 years at 0 interest." Jasper took the folder with hands that trembled slightly. Ownership, permanence, security for Lily's future. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll sign them," Faith replied, her amber eyes holding his with an intensity that spoke of more than business. "Say you'll let this place become everything it was meant to be. And maybe," she added more softly, "say you'll consider letting someone help you run it." The implications hung in the air between them, witnessed by the diner full of people who had become their extended family. Lily looked up from her homework, her face breaking into a knowing smile that suggested she understood exactly what was happening. "I think that sounds perfect," Jasper said quietly, holding Faith's gaze. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the Crossroads Diner, illuminating tables filled with laughter and community, Jasper Holt felt something he had thought lost forever. Not just hope, but certainty. Certainty that he had found his place in the world again. That the brotherhood forged in service extended far beyond battlefields. That family was built not just by blood but by choice and commitment and showing up for each other when it mattered most. The light of the Crossroads would stay on, now and always, a beacon for anyone who needed to find their way home. And Jasper, once lost in struggle and isolation, had finally found his path forward, surrounded by a daughter who was his purpose, a community that was his strength, and a future that promised hope, built on the unbreakable bonds of those who serve. The mission had changed, but it had never ended. It had simply evolved into something even more meaningful. A life of service, connection, and love that would echo long after the last motorcycle rode away into the Texas sunset. 2 years after that fateful summer night when 13 motorcycles rolled into a dying diner's parking lot, the Crossroads stood as more than just a restaurant. It had become a regional landmark, featured in veteran magazines and motorcycle travel guides as a must-visit destination where the coffee was strong, the food was honest, and every person who walked through the door mattered. Jasper and Faith had married in a ceremony held in the diner's parking lot, officiated by Patrick Bowen, and witnessed by over 300 veterans and riders. Lily served as the flower girl, wearing a custom leather jacket emblazoned with "Daughter of a Seal, Sister to the Road." The Crossroads now hosted monthly gatherings where veterans struggling with transition could find support, resources, and most importantly, understanding. A small apartment above the diner had been converted into temporary housing for veterans in crisis, a rotating safe haven funded by the network that had saved Jasper. On the wall behind the counter, next to Sarah's photograph, hung a framed collage of images from that miraculous week when community had conquered desperation, and below it, a simple plaque with words that Jasper read every morning. "The light stays on, the door stays open, always." Because some promises, once made to brothers and sisters in arms, to families found and built, to memories honored and futures secured, were meant to last forever. The thunder of approaching motorcycles remained a constant sound on the Texas highway, each arrival a reminder that no veteran ever had to face their battles alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.